of Season 4 of the We Talk series. We often hear change is the only constant, and we are seeing it up close and personal in our world of work today. In this world, HR and talent leaders are on their toes to remain prepared with strategies for workforce, talent, and business. This world brings us the opportunity to learn something new every day, and today is another such day with another expert. The We Talk series invites the most prominent HR leadership voices to share their amazing experiences and learnings on and around the HR ecosystem. So joining us today is Suvro Raychaudhari, Director HR, Asia Pacific Solution Delivery Center at CGI. A quick introduction about Suvro before we start. He holds about 2 decades of robust experience as an HR process consultant and a business enabler in human resources across sectors like IT, FMCG, and healthcare. Suvro is an HR leader who understands the power of inclusivity, and he's a strong proponent of business ethics and diversity in the workplace. With this, a very warm welcome, Suvro. It is indeed a delight to have you with us today.
Thank you, Boishaki, and it's been a privilege being here. Thank you.
Looking forward to an engaging discussion, Suvro. So to start off with today's discussion, my first question for you would be, how can talent acquisition professionals create a compelling job descriptions and career paths that resonate with the top talent out there in the market?
All right. I mean, I think if I have to snap the answer in one, I think they don't need to. But the light part of it aside, Boishaki, and we started our careers, as you mentioned, 20 years back, and I think the days of job descriptions and chartered career paths are kind of over, because today and going forward will be a day of what was earlier called job crafting and career transitions. And I think we have forgotten those 2 words over the last decade or so. It is about kind of operating across a range that offers opportunities to utilize and leverage, for example, different forms of intelligence and competencies that are available in and amidst the workforce. And sometimes what happens is when we create a job description, it's kind of sets expectations for certain statistical regularities in a job, and therefore they kind of encourage, even they don't intend to, is something that I call cognitive entrenchment. I couldn't find a better term, but it's called cognitive entrenchment. I mean, you tell a person that this is what your job description looks like, you're automatically kind of what do you call it, programming yourself to deliver as per that, and the world does not expect that, because we are in a, I mean, again, cliche, the hookah world, and things are different. We are supposed to and required to exceed the expectation and go beyond that. A job description kind of brings in the cognitive entrenchment where you are programmed to deliver as per the job, and then obviously, I mean, everything that arises out of that is what it is. Right. So it's fundamentally slightly complicated, because today's jobs are about keeping, 1 foot outside the domain, which is kind of having a high level of specialization, which is required. I'm not ignoring that or condoning that, but with a scope to recognize that a solution to a very complex problem in that particular domain that one specializes in may be coming from a very different one. Now, how do you craft that in a job description? I think it's literally impossible. I mean, we have crafted enough job description all through our careers, and we have realized that it is getting more and more challenging to craft what we refer to as a perfect job description, because there is none, right? And that's fundamentally the complexity about job descriptions today. And our career paths, to me, are the ones that encourage, there was at some point in time this typical competence that we used to talk about, saying analytical thinking. I think that is I wouldn't say out, but pretty much redundant. Today we are talking about something called analogical thinking rather than analytical thinking, and it's slightly different, where if I have a certain amount of experience and I depend on that, falling back to my career experiences is possibly not an option, because yesterday was yesterday, the day the way it is. So fundamentally, answering your question, I think it's more about job crafting if the job description sets the expectation that you are required to craft your job, that is a perfect job description. But writing out a regular job description that we have over the last couple of decades, that I have seen job descriptions and I've seen a lot of them, I really don't think it works. So that's fundamentally what it is.
Thank you, Suvro, for setting in the context. Very rightly, rather very beautifully mentioned the part where you mentioned it's not about job description, but rather crafting the job. So as we know, we have just touched upon one facet of recruitment, that is the job description, if I may say. But there are so many other facets when it comes to recruitment, which kind of makes it a very tedious task. So if I may ask that, how can one measure the effectiveness of their recruitment efforts and use that data to optimize their hiring decisions? What would be your take on that?
As I'm trying to rumble through the question, quite a few thoughts are coming in, but I'll try to keep it short. See, the field of recruitment in general has three primary metrics, to keep it very simple. And I will start with that before I ramble along, and please feel free to stop me. The three primary metrics that the world of recruitment always knew and still does is cost of hire, number one. Number two is time to fill. And number three is quality of hire. Every metrics is, I think, a subset of these three metrics. These are called the mother metrics, if you will. Now, the effectiveness of recruitment effort, therefore, is about integrating the recruitment process into the business planning process very early. A recruitment effort ceases to be efficient, I think, forget being effective, when the function does not receive, for example, right inputs on business growth, or is not included in the decision-making process on the right talent mix that can deliver the job. Talking about the job description to start with, like what you said in the earlier question, right? What is the job description? Are we hiring the right set of people? If we don't set that right in the beginning, in terms of the number of people that is required based on business growth, what is the business growth in the first place? And we are seeing a lot of this happen around the world around us, right? This entire great resignation suddenly changed into a employer market back again, where employees are feeling jittery now. And therefore, this equation between the employer and the employee is all over the place right now. And recruitment plays a very important part in this, by the way, because at one point in time, they're serving one side, and the other point of time, they're serving the other side, because there is a lot of ad hocism in decision making, because I think, though we measure and we have evolved a lot around recruitment metrics over the last few years, I think some basic fundamentals in terms of bringing recruitment team early on into the decision making and the business planning process itself is still a challenge, right? And of course, the other big challenge is about the metrics clashing with each other, right? So even if we have metrics, sometimes it's not effective unless they are synced together to see the right balance. Imagine a scenario where, let's say, quality of hire is the most critical factor due to the niche expertise required on the project. But obviously that comes at the cost of the other matrices, which are the cost of the hire and the time to fill. You won't get an expert at the right point in time. It's not a just-in-time thing that you go to a college and start recruiting, right? Even colleges you can't go to a college and start recruiting there because they also have their recruitment seasons. Now, some of these matrices clash with each other, and therefore the effectiveness is as good as the metric themselves in terms of how we define it and how we play that to see that even play between the three metrics, because otherwise, no matter how many metrics we track, it's not going to be effective anyway. The third, of course, about effectiveness is, or rather the lack of effectiveness that we see in the function, or the perceived lack of effectiveness that we see in the function, is about the volatility of business and just-in-time talent requirement, right? I mean, and it bulldozes all data-driven decisions arising out of the usual metrics. If I remember correctly, I mean, a Naukri JobSpeak report, the hiring fell to around 2% growth in 2023 January. And I think the Naukri JobSpeak report that I'm referring to was a February report, if I'm not mistaken, around that time, February of 2023, that is, vis-a-vis 2022 Jan. Now, 2022 Jan had shown a 22% increase over January 2021, with hiring activity growth in major sectors. And out of that, IT sector, which is where I operate, showed an 80% growth between 2021 and 2022, falling to a 2% in 2023. Now, this is the kind of volatility, right? Now, one critical element, of course, to help overcome this is to review the usual metrics on a periodic basis. Even if you have metrics, the effectiveness is in terms of reviewing the metrics on a periodic basis and the output of the data. I mean, we know that revenue in the IT services market is projected to reach around 18.85 billion. And I think that would be a compounded annual growth rate of 11%. And some of the companies have kind of reached around 18%, 19% revenue growth, but that's a rarity. Right now, even if I assume that the compounded annual growth rate is 11%, how can your hiring be projected up to an 80%? Right? And what metrics are we tracking, and how can those metrics be effective in a volatile situation as much as this, right? So I will stop by at this point in time, but there's a lot to talk about effectiveness of metrics. But fundamentally, coming back to the question, I think it's about defining and regularly reviewing at periodic intervals the three primary metrics that I talked about, right? Which is cost of hire, time to fill, and quality of hire. If the cost of hiring from college has increased, have I been able to discuss rate increases with the client accordingly? Right? And is that built into the business decision process? I mean, we can't talk about recruitment metrics in silos anymore. Right? And that's what I was saying about the job description thing. You say, this is my job description, and you play around here. I mean, the play would only be that much limited, right? You won't get people to put in discretionary effort and put in a larger play, which is what we want. Now, that is the problem of metrics. So or for example, if the number of open demands have increased, is that with complete 100% confidence level based on committed projects in the pipeline? That's the second question to ask. Third question may be, have I reviewed the job content well enough to ensure that the work cannot be done by trained junior to mid-level professionals and would need a niche expert? Now, regardless of the metrics that we track, there are certain subjective questions that we need to ask in order to make the metrics effective and the output optimal. I think that is where the effectiveness of recruitment today is.
Very beautifully pointed out, Suvro. So one thing I liked how you touched upon the point of volatility in terms of hiring, how it has gradually over the years become so volatile, and which personally leads me to believe one thing, that in somewhere in this journey, employee development program also plays a very crucial role. So we have been talking about employee development programs holistically a lot. But one aspect that companies have started focusing very much is when it comes to the new generation. So we know that the Gen Z is kind of attention deficit, and organizations are also kind of getting very agile when they are comprising their employee development programs. So if I may ask you that, what are your piece of advice for crafting and implementing an employee development program that resonates with the new generation's desire for this continuous learning and growth? If you can shed some light on that.
Sure, Vaishakhi. Yeah, I know. I mean, we do talk about Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, God knows, I mean, baby boomers. But I mean, India is very complex. I think these are outputs of researches that have been done in certain parts of the world. If I look at a country like India, which is where I have born and brought up and where I've worked and things like that, I think a talent from Meerut is very different from a talent from Pollachi, and it is regardless of generations. I think the definition of talentscaping needs to go to a far more complex level than just Gen Zs. But that on the lighter side. To answer your question, I think yes, you're very right. I mean, right out of job descriptions and recruitment and things like that comes the process of talent management, which is what I guess your question is about. What on the responses that I was trying to refer to, See, narrow specializations created by job descriptions and career paths are not only a thing of the past, but it's also a slightly dangerous thing, because when we do that, we are kind of, as I said, that cognitive entrenchment about the human tendency to rely on experiences that have worked very well, finding out familiar patterns that have worked very well, and therefore can possibly backfire pretty horribly in what we refer to as an unkind world. And the unkind world is a wicked world, and the wicked world is about wicked learning. Now, unless we kind of entrench ourselves and assimilate this understanding, it'll be a little bit of a challenge to develop any kind of a capability development program for not just Gen Zs, but even the older guys like me, right? Because learning is omnipresent. It's generation regardless. But I'll come to that a little bit later. But let me tell you something about my workplace. We had around 840,000 hours of learning recorded in the system from close to around 18,000 employees. We call our employees members, by the way. But for the sake of simplicity, I'll refer to the term as employees. So 18,000 employees put in 840,000 hours of learning in 2022, right? And a member satisfaction score and the client satisfaction score was upwards of 9 on a scale of 9 to 10. And things like that. Now, we create innovation daily, and our innovation score has been around 9 out of 10 from the delivery center that we operate in. We leverage insights from in-depth client interviews to ensure innovations are client-driven, right? So that there's no mistake between novelty and innovation. And there's a big mistake that we tend to do. We overstate that word innovation, but what we actually see is novelty. And we say that, okay, will you budget for this? Will you let this happen? I want this much amount of headcount and this much amount of capability development program because I'm innovating something. You are not innovating something. You are creating something novel, which is very different from innovation. Innovation doesn't happen overnight. Innovation doesn't happen every day. It takes quite a bit of time to do something which is innovative and which is sustainably innovative, that is. So things like that. Now, obviously, in this, so we have been very successful. We are a 46-year-old multinational in its true sense of what a multinational is. And we have metrics to show what our success rates are. I'm not going to talk about that, but because that's a given. But what we have realized is that it is imperative to lead generations of workforce. And it's not just about Gen Zs, as I said, it's also about, really old folks like us, through certain open tunnel of diverse experiences and create small shock learnings in the system that do not unnerve us, as in the learners, but keep us agile and awake. Now, that would mean creating continuous stretch targets, for example, and that comes with the goal setting process, right? So when I say stretch targets, it's about identifying developmental programs, for example, that are curated from a range where we need to operate on. And for example, this may involve, let's say, moving a core tech person into people management in a project that has gone red, right? Or continuous cross-skilling and upskilling on emerging technology trends. Or let's say moving an HR person into client consulting on an HR tech project, or moving into finance professionals into compensation grievance resolutions and things like that, right? But I'm just going out of the box here. But fundamentally, Gen Zs have a very large blue sky wish list. Now, large organizations have needs to be fulfilled, right? So it's important to draw the middle line of convergence of those needs which the organization has versus what the Gen Zs need. So fundamentally, when we talk about capability development programs for Gen Zs, for me, it's about setting expectations for all generation of workers on the bread and butter work that we need to do. Now, after that expectation is set and we measure performance and consistency of delivery on those, we identify high performers for high paid upskilling programs that we know may be around the corner. Now, we need to understand that the content of capability development programs have to be well understood before we spend on them or before we design them, regardless, and that is regardless of the generations. I mean, I'll give you a simple example, and I will talk very operational out here, okay, so that we are on the same platform. At a very simplistic level, let's say there's a Java developer. We are trying to upskill to a full stack Java developer, right? Now, building a fully functioning web application is at the base of it. Now, then comes the understanding of validations on forms, dynamic web applications, for example, concepts related to things like generics, handling sessions in JSP. Then comes the Spring framework and the Spring Boot and things like that. Now, these kind of things require a very staged approach to program development, as much as building a managerial excellence program or a leadership development program. So coming to your point, Vaishakhi, I think at the core of capability development program is to understand that yes, we do have a template, that these are the things that we need to do. These are the kind of projects that are coming in, and these are the technology areas that are involved in the projects. But Gen Z tends to get bored with it. And therefore, we need to curate certain emerging technology platforms. But the entry for that is not for the entire generation. The entry to that is for certain identified high capability people who have done well on the need part of what we need to do, and therefore exhibited their performance and potential to be able to take on those projects around the corner. So it's about developing programs and investing in kind of programs which do not go wasted. You have a whole bunch of certification programs being paid for, 30% usage. Doesn't help, right? It's waste of money. So we need to curate certain things where people take interest, take the stretch, and are participative in the process of learning.
Very rightly pointed out. Indeed, you have touched upon some very pertinent points in this question. So, Suvro, this kind of leads me to my last question. That is, we have talked about a couple of points that holistically frames, uh, if I may say, to a perfect employer branding at the end of the day. So, if I may ask you that, how should companies create opportunities for employees to provide feedback, most importantly, make them feel heard, and then use that feedback to improve the workplace? Because as we all know, at the end of the day, the employee feedback is something that kind of makes or breaks an organization. So what would be your take on that?
Yeah. I think there are very simple and effective ways of doing this, but learning to drop our familiar tools are a great way, I think, to create opportunities for employees to provide feedback and feel heard. And we can do it in very simple ways. It all depends on how we apply it in simplicity. The first mechanism, for example, is to use the goal setting process. And I will start with that because that's very fundamental for me. I mean, the goal setting process is not just an objective setting process, right? And there's enough heartburn around in every organization regarding the goal setting process and the performance appraisals that happen at the end of the goal setting as an outcome of the goal setting process in terms of how much you have achieved, how much you have not achieved, and things like that. So I will start right from there. I think the goal setting process, if done right, is a great way to get a feedback on whether our leaders are aware of how to create goals that align with the organizational targets, being reasonably stretched, being mindful, and keeping that little room for errors and learning in that journey towards that goal. Now, that is a very, very important understanding for me because it's right at the core of it. I think it's Henry Mintzberg or maybe Chris Argyris, any of these two scholars, said that every manager has a mental model of the world, in which he or she acts based on experience and knowledge. Now, when a manager takes a decision, he or she thinks of behavior alternatives within their mental model. Now, that's a single loop learning. And I would refer back to what we were discussing in the first point, Vaishakhi, is about not working within the template of job description because those days are kind of gone, right? We need to understand that if we work within our mental models, the output would only be what we are thinking, and we are not, and not about what we are thinking beyond or what we can think beyond, right? And that's what I was referring to as cognitive entrenchment. Now, Now, my objective as an HRBP, for example, is to disrupt that mental model in the first place. It's very simple. Now, this calls for changing the objective itself and the treatment of its output, right? And obviously, this takes me down into understanding managerial behaviors and kind of actions to gain insights on whether there is an environment, for example, of questioning the assumptions, right, about that objective, and the ways of discovering and inventing new alternatives in terms of how that goal can be met, or how how can how can that goal be set in the first place, right? And perceptions as well as ways of approaching problems. I mean, we obviously have our usual deep dive internal and external surveys to take feedback. We have a 97% level of participation in our Voice of Members survey. It's called VOM in CGI. And we take surveys from the employee base on business planning and where they see us going and where they want us to go. And we are 2 years in sequence top employers and a recognized great place to work. All of that, however, is an output of a little bit of a deep effort in including feedback as a double loop learning mechanism in our system. I make a mistake, I learn out of it, I get that into the loop, and I make sure that mistake doesn't happen. So I think that is one of the most, to me, a kind of what do you say, a better approach to create opportunities for employees to provide feedback and feel heard and use this feedback to improve the workplace.
Thank you so much, Suvro, for sharing those absolute, insights on some of the few highly discussed questions of the HR ecosystem nowadays. And with that, we kind of wrap up our conversation for the day. I will not mention that it was an absolute delight listening to your thoughts and advice, and the way you beautifully pictured out with, certain examples also. So I'm sure our audience will resonate with what you have stated, and they'll take back something really learning with them. So with that, once again, to our audiences, thank you for joining us today. We will be back with yet another exciting conversation very soon. Till then, keep talking, everyone.